President Trump's recent meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin and then days later with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alongside a delegation of European leaders have made headlines. But the war in Ukraine continues, with Russia unleashing an especially heavy overnight strike. What was really accomplished with all these meetings, and where does the war go from here? Joining us now from Washington is Dr. Evelyn Farkas. She's director of the McCain Institute. Always a pleasure, Evelyn. Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts on what happened yesterday, because it seemed like a lot was happening, but what really happened?
Yeah, good to see you, Ted. Unfortunately, there was a lot of drama. It was interesting to see all of these world leaders around President Trump and, of course, rallying around President Zelensky. But I'm afraid that there was not much tangible progress that was made. President Trump came out of the meeting saying that President Zelensky and President Putin would meet. I think that's highly unlikely. So it remains to be seen whether there was some understandings gained behind the scenes on security agreements. But again, I'm cautiously pessimistic.
Yeah, I want to get to those security agreements, the possibility of those agreements in a second here. But the impact of having so many European leaders, heads of state, they are in Washington around a table with Zelensky, with President Trump. It looked impressive. Did much come out of it?
And it was impressive because it showed a level of unity that we haven't seen in Europe, frankly. Even when it comes to Russia's aggression, this kind of level of unity where they would drop everything, in the middle of, I know that Prime Minister Starmer was on vacation and he interrupted his vacation to come over here to make sure that President Trump understood the position of the Europeans and supported the best possible position for Ukraine. So I think in that it was meaningful, and President Trump was gracious and received them warmly. And so the optics were good. But in terms of outcome, that really remains to be seen. I was glad they talked about security guarantees, but my fear, Ted, is that there's a lot of daylight between them in terms of what security guarantee means.
Well, and I think President Trump told Fox News today, it does not mean U.S. boots on the ground over there. And if that's not what it means, the president has threatened sanctions in 2 weeks. That came and went. He says especially difficult reaction if they keep doing this, that, and the other. They're still doing this, that, and the other, Russia is. Nothing seems to have happened on the Russian side, but we're hearing, Evelyn, that he likes the idea of Ukraine surrendering land for peace. What do you make of that?
Right. I think that it is something that Ukraine might consider, but Ukraine would only consider surrendering land for peace if it's a durable, lasting peace. And that's where these security guarantees come into play. Having U.S. troops on the ground actually isn't enough either. It's really what the Ukrainians need is a guarantee that if they are attacked again by Russia, that the United States will come to their military assistance. And in order to believe that kind of guarantee, actually, it has to be ratified by Congress, I think, at this point. It can't come just from any U.S. president. I think the Ukrainians will want it to be like a NATO, what we call Article 5. An attack against one is an attack against all. Article 5 in the treaty that created NATO says that. That kind of agreement could be ratified bilaterally. So we have that same commitment to Japan and Korea. We could get that through Congress, and that would mean something. But short of that, it gets more risky for the Ukrainians.
And it sounds like the president, again, earlier he wanted a ceasefire. Now he's saying he does not want a ceasefire. He wants a peace agreement, and that a ceasefire would be the lesser. And so forget that. Peace agreement or nothing. Ceasefire is awfully important, Evelyn. You mentioned Korea. There's still a ceasefire in Korea. They never had a peace settlement.
Correct. Well, I think what happened was President Trump went into the meeting. Well, first of all, as you mentioned, President Trump put pressure on Vladimir Putin. He said, I'm going to slap sanctions on countries that are buying oil and gas from you. And he actually did increase tariffs on India as a punishment. In response, but he was going to put more sanctions on, more tariffs on. In response, President Putin said, no, I'll meet with you. So they met. Well, going into the meeting, President Trump said, I must have a ceasefire coming out of this meeting. And as you point out, he's now dropped the requirement for a ceasefire. That happened after he met with President Putin. And that is, concerning because the Europeans and the Ukrainians saw it as something that would be kind of the minimum that Russia could do to show that they might be willing to negotiate in good faith. It would only be a first step because, frankly, Vladimir Putin's broken a lot of ceasefires, but it could provide some relief. So I think the Europeans are distressed that President Trump has come off of that requirement.
Yeah, and a peace agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, these things take a long time to develop and a long time to get done. Putin and Trump could both be history by then.
Right. I mean, even when you have a ceasefire. So let's take the example of Armenia and Azerbaijan. President Trump is saying he brought an end to that war. Actually, the war was brought to an end under the Biden administration. But they still don't have a peace agreement because they still have yet to, as you said, settle on all of those details. But the important thing is that the guns are silenced and they're not combating one another.
Yeah, so what do we take of all this? And before we get that last question, I got to ask you, when you saw Vladimir Putin stepping foot on a red carpet on American soil in Alaska, what did you make of that? What were your thoughts? What did you feel?
I felt distressed because it was showing weakness on the part of the United States. Here we were letting a war criminal come onto our territory to have this high-level meeting, the highest level that you could have with our president. If anything, he should have been escorted, from his plane into an airplane hangar, a sparse hangar on the military base. He did not deserve red carpet treatment. There are people who have been raped, murdered, and kidnapped, including children, because of his decisions, because of his decision to launch this war. So it was regrettable, and also it made us look weak because we have the upper hand, yet President Trump gave him the upper hand even in the press conference when he let him speak first.
Yeah. Last question here. It's a weird question, but it sounds like President Trump is just really, really wanting a Nobel Peace Prize. And that could very well be behind much of what we're seeing and hearing here. What are your thoughts on that? And, I mean, is there an end justifying the means here? If you give him a prize and you get peace, is it worth it?
Well, it all depends what kind of peace, right? I mean, you don't want to have a peace that doesn't last, so it's a shaky peace. That's not helpful to anyone because again, it's not just about stopping Putin's aggression against Ukraine. It's about stopping Putin's aggression against other European countries. Don't forget he's occupied Georgia as well, 20% of that country. It's about protecting our NATO allies. It's about making sure that China sees that you can't get away with seizing your neighbor's territory so it doesn't make a move against Taiwan, right? It's about making sure that the international order stands up, that borders matter, and you can't alter them using force. Otherwise, we're back to a world that's far more dangerous. So the peace that we get is important. It's not any old peace. Yes, if President Trump can get a durable, lasting, just peace for the Ukrainians, and sure, they'll have to give up something. If he can get something that will last, that will be just from the perspective of the Ukrainian people, that would mean that he was worthy of the Nobel Prize. But unfortunately, today, I don't feel like we're close to that place right now.
Dr. Evelyn Farkas, again, McCain Institute Director. Always great information, always great to speak with you. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted. Take care.